So the first Inside Out movie came out 9 years ago, 2015. It was an original Pixar production at the time, directed by Pete Docter. Very much one of their more famous directors, who is now actually running Pixar. He is sort of the executive creative director of everything Pixar. He directed that movie. It was based off of some personal experiences with his daughter, seeing how her emotions changed and evolved over the years. And it became a huge smash hit of 2015. Not only is it one of the best films of that year, but critically, it was revered. Commercially, it was a smash success, made like over $850 million worldwide. It was just a success by every single metric you can think of. I think it might have even won the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature Film at that year's Oscars. And so it was just an amazing, amazing achievement on the part of Pixar, especially considering it was an original film.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also, which is interesting, is that I don't know, in hindsight, it kind of feels like maybe the last sort of vestige of an era, an old era of Pixar before things really, really changed. I think once we got past Inside Out 2 and we started
Yeah.
to enter into some of these more recent years, the past 7 or 8 years, we started to notice a bit of a sea change. A lot of those old creators that worked at Pixar started to transition and move on. People like Brad Bird, John Lasseter, of course, had a lot of controversy around him. There were just a lot of things evolving. And most notably, which we've talked about on the show, the past 4 years for Pixar have been the most challenging that I think that they've ever experienced. It's just been a whirlwind of things, from a lot of their releases going directly to Disney Plus and not having theatrical releases, to even more notably this year, they laid off a big, big chunk of their staff, which I don't think has ever happened before. So Pixar is just in a huge, huge era of transition and also just challenges to overcome. And Inside Out 2 kind of feels like the first true sign of light at the end of the tunnel after a really, really dark 4 years. And we've talked a lot about their movies and how they have just mostly not met our expectations over the past couple of years, really ever since COVID got going. But with all of that out the way, we did get a chance to check out Inside Out 2 this past weekend. And I will pass it over to you, man. What do you think about this brand new feature film from Disney and Pixar?
Yeah, so that first Inside Out really is like just a really good film, man. And at the time, it does feel it is something so fresh and something so original. And so, just after everything you just said and what Pixar was going through, they really needed a win. And this movie worries me because it is a win. And it worries me because this movie is good. It's going crazy in the box office. It's doing well critically, but it is a sequel. And we know they're planning a lot more sequels, Disney in general, not necessarily Pixar completely, although we know Toy Story is coming. But we do know this is a sequel, and it's just man, it's a weird place to be in. But Inside Out itself, Inside Out 2, they do what they do with the first one and follow the natural progression. In my rewatch in the first Inside Out, I didn't even realize, but at the end they literally kind of hint like, here's this new button that says puberty on it. I was like, wait a second, not sure I remember that. So technically they set up this sequel a long time ago. Like, this was probably planned even before the downfall, quote unquote downfall of Pixar. So it was the natural progression of what was going to happen next in this story. And long story short, the main character, Riley, she's about to hit puberty, or she does hit puberty, and all of the emotions that you knew before, anger, fear, joy, sadness, disgust, they go through some stuff. A wrecking ball comes through, and some new emotions are moving into Riley because she is now hitting puberty, and it's anxiety is now here, embarrassment is here, envy is here, and what was the last one? Boredom? Was it boredom? Was that what it was? I think. But it's just crazy, I think, to see where we come from, but it was fun. There's a lot going down with all these new emotions. What I do like about this film that the first one didn't have is there is a villain. I won't tell you who the villain is, but there is a villain in here, and I'm really happy to see that they had a villain. I think it changed the dynamic. That has been a criticism we have had on our podcast. Disney hasn't had villains here recently, but I think having a villain here added the layers to this movie that there needed to be, and it was a very well chosen one. I thought it was very smart. This movie is beautiful. It looks good. There are certain times where you're going to go ooh and ah, and I'm just like, wow, that's a lot of colors. And to put it quite frankly, this movie made me laugh. There's plenty of times where I was laughing in this film, and you know, I actually there was it might have made me laugh more than the first one. I think the first movie made me feel more, but this movie probably had me laughing a little bit more than the first one, if I can recall. And I thought that was interesting. There's some silly things that happen that I enjoyed. And by the end of it, man, I thought they told a very well thought out story with Riley and everything that she was supposed to go through as a teenager that's going through puberty. I thought it was very well thought out. I don't think it hit my heartstrings as much as I thought it was going to going into the film, but overall, man, I think it was a good outing for Pixar, and Inside Out 2 is a success. I really thoroughly enjoyed myself, man, and I can't wait to see again what they do next. Hopefully, this is the first step towards Pixar being back. We'll see what happens after this, but they really needed this win, and I think they got it.
Uh, Inside Out 2 is a big success for Pixar. It works on a lot of different levels. It is funny. It does hit some emotions that are just so relatable for a lot of people. The fact that the main character is now sort of entering into that teenage era, that puberty era. Most of this movie is about focusing on the complex, sophisticated emotions that develop around that particular time in your life when things just become so cloudy, so confusing, so frustrating all the time. And it really sort of dictates how you navigate life, especially at that early age and your relationships in your life. And this movie touches on a lot of that. It touches on how you might potentially alienate certain friends, how you might change up your appearance and your own personal mannerisms to try to fit in. All those things that are really, really difficult choices that you don't even always realize you're doing. They just kind of become second nature. They kind of become those instinctive choices you make to just survive and make it to the next day. They play with all of that stuff. And I think that those are just the most enjoyable and the best elements of Inside Out 2, when you just get to see all of these emotions at odds with each other, because that's what it's like at that age when you're entering 13, 14, 15 years old. Emotions are just often so conflicting and so confusing. You're like a walking paradox where nothing is making sense. And I felt like a lot of that movie was this, because the big new character that's introduced here, Anxiety, voiced by Maya Hawke, who was phenomenal in this movie, a lot of times I felt watching that character like, oh yeah, actually anxiety is good to have here. Anxiety
Mm-hmm.
is a useful emotion to have. It's not something that we
Yeah.
should just look at as like, oh, let's just, put that away in a closet and never think about it. No, anxiety can be a very positive thing, but also how do you control that? How do you manage that emotion in comparison to your other emotions like anger and joy and sadness, all of those things of course that they play with again in the film. And I just love that conversation that they go back and forth with in this movie. The fact that not everything is always the right way to feel, but sometimes like that way to
Mm-hmm.
feel is the right way to feel, and you have to just let it wash over you and allow yourself to go through it. This movie's touching on a lot there, and I think it's actually kind of a big step for Pixar, because they don't really make movies like this, and they don't make movies that are really focused on teenagers. A lot of their movies
Mm-hmm.
are focused on kids and younger kids. It's only been a couple of times where we've gotten to this level of, hey, let's really sort of unpack this and unpack the challenges and kind of the darkness that a young teenager might go through, and just the uncertainty of what that might entail. And I just love that they went that direction. This is definitely one of the more sophisticated Pixar movies where they're tackling all that stuff. But on
For
top of that,
sure.
it is hilarious. It's really, really funny. There's so many moments. Not to give too much away, but there's a moment where basically there's multiple styles of animation introduced in the movie, and you just get to see like how these things interact with each other. Multiple
It's
characters.
great.
There's like a Final Fantasy inspired character here. Like
Mm-hmm.
that stuff was just brilliant, just amazing. And lastly, I think again, just sort of circling back to the point of like the new emotions that are introduced. It's a
Mm-hmm.
host of new characters. It's a lot of new characters that we see. Great voice work by everybody. But it's interesting to me that a lot of animated movies now are leaning into what anxiety means for people. I think about the
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Verse movies. There's definitely
Yeah.
like moments of anxiety that are addressed in that film, or even the most
Mm-hmm.
recent Puss in Boots movie. Like
Yep.
that character has an anxiety attack in that film,
Even
and we get to see
Orion
what
in the
that's
dark.
we get to see what that's
Mm-hmm.
like. And I think it's an interesting era. I don't know if it's necessarily it's probably not either a good or a bad thing. I mean, I think it's a useful thing that we confront that, because people are more aware of it now. Because I think we
Mm-hmm.
talk about that stuff a lot more as a culture. But also, sometimes that is used in place of having like a real traditional villain, which this film doesn't do. It manages to sort of navigate and balance both of those things, and I think in really, really useful ways. But overall, this was a really, really big success for Pixar. They absolutely did need it, and it's proven to be very, very well received, not only critically but commercially especially, this movie is just making all the money in the first few days that it's been out. So far, it's grossed already $333 million worldwide. It had the third biggest opening day debut for an animated film domestically, only behind Incredibles 2 and the Lion King movie that came out in 2019. It's the biggest animated opening for any movie, any animated movie in history worldwide. It made like $295 million worldwide, and that's
Ooh.
the biggest ever. This is exactly what they needed. A lot of money and a huge success story. You kind of touched on it a little bit earlier in terms of what this might mean for Pixar, because this certainly signals that people want those beloved films to get more movies and to get more
Mm-hmm.
stories. But at the same time, what does that mean for original stories that aren't as well received?
Exactly.
Which,
Yep.
for better and for worse, some of those original stories that have come out in the past few years haven't always been that great. I don't know why
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Turning Red is the exception, but a movie like Onward, I thought that that was very mid. Luca was mid. Like, these
Ooh.
movies haven't really been working, but when we get back to like the stuff that we know and love, that's what people show up for. And maybe it
Mm-hmm.
sort of signals what the future of the Pixar brand might be. What do you take away from just like the box office numbers, the success that this movie is having, and sort of how it can dictate the future of Pixar as a brand moving forward?
Yeah, man, those box office numbers are crazy. Oh, it's insane. But I think I think I think now maybe they might have to hit some of these well known properties and then start to mix in some of those new properties again. Because it kind of felt like that's kind of how it was for a little bit in the beginning, right? Like Toy Story 2 kind of had to happen. And then like, oh, let's go make, some of these other films that may be original. And maybe that gives them a momentum in the care to move on to the next movies. That makes sense. Like maybe we now have our formula again of what it means to have a good film, a well thought out, well directed, well written, well crafted film. Let's take our learnings. This movie is successful and move into the next film. Maybe they needed that. Maybe they needed this win and they might need a couple more wins with sequels to then go into that era of now let's try something original again. And maybe we're just going to be with the sequels for the next couple of years, and maybe that's what we have to deal with until it comes to that time. That's kind of what I'm thinking right now. But I think overall, this is good for Pixar. I think they'll be excited again, because even in my mind, I can imagine they were down in the dumps after things like Lightyear, down in the dumps after Luca, down in the dumps after some of these other movies, and now maybe there's brightness. The sun is shining again over at Pixar Studios. So that's kind of my hope. I'm hoping that's the conclusion they can come to, and maybe start giving us some good originals again. But until then, in my mind, they'll probably just keep cranking out the sequels until they can sprinkle in some of those originals.
Look, it's Hollywood. It's all about the numbers and the money at the end of the day. This is absolutely going to have significant ramifications on the next few years. And animated movies have such a long lead time. There's a host of films that they're working on right now that we have no idea about.
Easy. Mm-hmm.
That'll all be original, new concepts. Pixar has always done that. They've never abandoned just making new and original stories. They used to have a lot more success doing that and a better hit rate. But again, just due to the changing times, changing leadership, and just sort of the evolving taste, I think, of the movie going audience, it just hasn't worked as well lately. I think that they've just been struggling to sort of find a new place as things have changed drastically, especially in the world of animation, a particular industry that they used to dominate single
Mm-hmm.
handedly. And that's not the case anymore. There's actually some pretty stiff competition out there when you look at Illumination and how massively successful they've been, or even a studio like Sony Pictures Animation with what they've done with the Spider-Verse movies. DreamWorks is still cranking out like 2 to 3 movies a year. Some of them find really really huge success, and so it's just a more difficult industry in general to be creative, to be different. It's craft stories that people want to actually go see. And really the elephant in the room has been streaming and Disney Plus, and how that's just trained a generation of people to watch a lot of this stuff at home. And now it looks like the only things that get people out of the house are those well-established, beloved
Mm-hmm.
franchises that people already know that they can count on are going to be really, really good. And that can be scary to some extent. I mean, when you see this amount of money at the box office, for theaters, it's a great sign. For Pixar, it's a great sign. But it does mean something. It does mean something for those other films that are getting made that are original. Could a Turning Red have done something like this in theaters? I
Hmm.
don't know. Could any of those original movies? And in some cases we can point to them and say like, no, you tried out Lightyear and nobody cared. Nobody wanted to see it.
Yeah.
It's leading directly into why we're getting Toy Story 5, and
Hmm.
I don't know. It's always just going to be a really, really difficult conversation to have because many people want original things, they want new ideas, but our
People don't go see
pockets
him.
and our dollars are telling them differently. Like that's
Yeah,
just a
you gotta
reality
go
of
watch
it.
it.
So
Hmm.
I don't know if we can necessarily have it both ways at this particular point,
Yeah.
especially as they are trying to grapple with streaming and its place in their entire ecosystem. But ultimately, Disney did what they needed to do to make this movie successful. They activated every lever within their company to make sure that everybody saw this. They have
Hmm.
a tremendous ecosystem at their disposal and probably the best marketing machine in Hollywood to make something like this achievable, from Disney Plus and what they can do there with the merchandising, with the ad spots, all of the stuff that they can just, sort of activate the parks. Everything feeds into this big beast, which is why Inside Out is so successful. And it's probably going to be one of their more successful films that they've ever made. And again, those same things will continue to activate when we see more films like Toy Story 2. I think inevitably Incredibles 3, will be on the way at some point. Like all of that stuff is just going to continue to be kind of their big pillars. And the stuff that happens in between from the new up and coming sort of young filmmakers, with new original voices. I just hope and pray we can kind of show up for those movies in the same way that we are for the stuff that we already know. But we'll certainly have to see. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the brand new Disney Pixar film, Inside Out 2. If you've checked this out, hit us up and let us know what you think.